Hello and welcome, everybody, to the Podcasting for Small Business Companion Podcast. I'm Sidney-Smith, and I'm joined here with Steve Orr. We're very excited today to talk about podcasting for small business, which just came out today on December 2nd. And so, for those of you who are unaware, Steve and I just published Podcasting for Small Business, and it is subtitled The Essential Blueprint to Launch Your Podcast. And so we're going to talk through really some of the reasons why we started the podcast book itself. We're going to talk about some of the behind the scenes conversations that we had, why we included items in the book, why we chose to exclude items from the book. We'll talk about some of the behind the mic conversations and lessons that we've learned from and with small business owners who have been planning to launch and grow their own podcasts. And so this is just really an opportunity for Steve and I to interact and explore a lot about the podcasting space that we've been in for quite some time as we've been preparing for this book. And the podcast episodes will also be released in the podcast feeds. So you'll be able to go ahead and download them and listen to them there. And it's just kind of a companion to the book itself. So with that, there are some of you who maybe don't know Steve. And so I want to turn it over to Steve to maybe introduce yourself, Steve, to folks, and then we can go from there.
Hello. So my professional life really in many ways began when I was 13 years old. I received a clock radio as a gift. I was listening late at night to WHAS radio from Louisville, Kentucky, living in the New York City suburbs. They were running Mystery Theater hosted by E.G. Marshall, old time radio dramas. That's what did it for me, sparked my interest in audio, the theater of the imagination. And that really sparked my whole career, became a journalism major, went into broadcasting for over 30 years. You name it, I have done it. You name the hour, I have worked it. You name the day, I have worked it. But after over 30 years, I made a career change after my radio network. I was a business anchor reporter at the Market Watch radio network. That went under. And I shifted gears, sharing my knowledge. And now I help folks with media training, and I help them with podcasting, become more engaging podcasters, more effective speakers.
Fantastic. Wonderful. And this is fun because I'm learning something new about you, Steve, here, because I didn't know that story about you when you were younger and what got you into radio. So that's really fantastic. I come from it from a little bit of a different angle. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sidney-Smith, and my background is in just being a small business evangelist. I love small businesses. I love being able to make sure that they can start, manage, and grow in the right ways using technology. And so what we want to do today is to really kind of set up a three-act structure like we talk about in the book with regard to why we think you should start a podcast. And so we thought we would start with at least the basics of why Steve and I decided to write this book and why we decided to write it together. And so I'm going to start. I'm going to have Steve start us off with kind of some of the background, and we can go from there.
So the inspiration for me actually was very simple. I met you, and we met in Alexandria, Virginia at a small business development center event. You were leading a round table discussion, and we got to chatting when you heard, a little bit about my background. And then we thought, oh my goodness, at least on my end, oh my goodness, our skill sets mesh. And the light bulb went off for me. It's like, okay, our skill sets mesh. And it's like, oh my gosh, I have all these skills as a broadcaster that can help in the podcasting world. And those discussions led to, oh, maybe here's a book. And then here's a book that can help a lot of small businesses figure out new ways to grow, to reach a new audience, perhaps in a more unique way. And what better way than podcasting?
Yeah, and so snap back before that, I was leading these workshops and seminars called Podcasting for Small Business. And they were all about a medium that I was very comfortable with because I had been doing podcasting. I had been podcasting for several years. I started my first podcast in like '08, '09, and had seen quite lot of remarkable success in podcasting, not necessarily at first in my business, but more just I'm a time management nerd. So I just love everything about time management. So I was putting out these podcasts about time management, and I found my community. I found my tribe, and I really was so pleased with being able to be connected with people across the world in this way. And I just found the power in the medium so quickly and easily that by the time I started teaching podcasting for small business through the economic development agencies, it was a natural fit for me to do so. And then I met Steve, and as you said, there was just this simpatico between our skill sets and our perspectives. They were different. They were coming from different worlds, and I think that was really helpful. I didn't know, a Lufs from a mic stand. I just knew that I had been doing all of this work, and it was proving successful. And so we endeavored to do this, and minus some hurdles of taking some time away from the book and coming back and so on and so forth. We finally are here in 2025 publishing the book, and I'm really pleased with the outcome of what we've come up with to be able to help small businesses from every vantage point really be able to have that kind of, as we say, essential blueprint to really start a podcast that we know they can be successful with if they follow the instructions. And that was really the true goal there.
So let's get into that a little bit, Ray. Very common question that I prepare. I work with a lot of business book authors for media trading. So a very common question they get is, "What is your book about?" So give me your 30-second spiel on what is our book about.
This is a difficult one for me only because the title really says it all. So what I have been telling folks though is this is not a book for hobbyists. This is not a book for influencers who want to start a podcast. This is for a business owner or someone who is in a business, a small business, who, and again, small business is a broad term here. Most businesses are small businesses in the United States. So if you're listening to this or seeing this, you are a small business most likely. And so, for those businesses out there who want to promote themselves utilizing a marketing channel that is tried and true, that's tested, then podcasting for small business is something that you should think about.
So I also want to add to that, one of the parts of our book that I think is unique is we have created fictional podcasters for this book so you can follow their journey. And that is Beth and Monique, who we follow throughout the podcast. If you're looking at the book and you're thinking about podcasting, they're going to be, thinking they're going to have the same challenges, the same questions that you might. So we break all that down, give a lot of examples of how they would do something in this book. And one of the reasons, and we talked about this a little bit, one of the reasons we chose women podcasters, actually, well, a couple of reasons. Women own roughly 40% of the country's small businesses. So looking for more representation for women, not only in the small business world, but in the podcasting world. Just over a quarter of podcast hosts are women. So that was going through the back of my mind as well. And, more than half of podcast listeners are men. So women are underrepresented in this particular industry right now in more ways than one. So we thought it was a nice way to kind of tie learning about podcasting also with the mission of trying to get an underrepresented, portion of our population, women, to get more involved in podcasting.
Yeah, what's even funnier about this, Steve, is that I had off the cuff created Beth and Monique, and I just brought them to you because what had happened was that I was giving these seminars, and I wanted to have relatable characters, and I created Beth and Monique just in my mind's eye as I was talking. Nothing nothing set in stone. I would just talk about them as like examples of these two podcasters who started a pastry podcast and so on and so forth. And I'm not the most creative in that sense type of person. And so I would just, I would just talk about them, and I would make different details up every time I gave a seminar, that kind of thing. But then I brought the characters to you, and I'd explained that most of the clients I saw at the small business development centers, most of the clients I saw at the SBDCs, as well as other economic development agencies, were women. The vast majority of them were. Yet at the same time, as you said, many times they're underrepresented in other capacities, certainly in business ownership, and certainly in the podcasting space. And so you decided that it would be a good idea to include them in the book, and minus the fact that I thought you were crazy. I I
Well, I
thought,
am,
well,
but that's a whole other story.
I thought this is, like this is going to push me outside of my comfort zone, and a lot of this book pushed me outside of my comfort zone. But it would ultimately be a good way for us to detail the inner workings of what business owners actually feel and struggle with as they make their way through the book. And so, as you started writing those first few vignettes, they were really interesting to me because, one, I would never have included them in any book that I was writing, but by myself. But I also found them to be incredibly relatable. They're very relatable characters, and I think they're fun characters to add some levity to maybe a little. A very technical concept. The book has a lot of technical pieces to it, so it feels like they add a lot of levity and fun to the book that I think is a real nice addition.
And we should also mention that we do have one of the things we created was a podcast trailer for Beth and Monique's fake podcast. And I had a couple of friends of mine voice that for us. So that will be available, I believe, through our website. We will be actually having the website as an example, this fake podcast with our fake podcasters as a sample of what you can do for your own podcast. So, and take that one step further. Um, I have also just created a promo, which will be on LinkedIn. Look for that in the next day. I have created a promo where our dear friends Beth and Monique endorse our book. So we have fake podcasters with a fake podcast, fake podcast hosts with a fake podcast, the real voices, because they're friends of mine, I will say, they're real voices voicing these fake characters endorsing our book.
Fantastic. And actually the website, once it goes live and we do publish it for folks to see with everything, I'll be using that as the example in the tutorials for the YouTube tutorials that we'll be putting together. So you'll actually see that as the functional front end. So I'll be releasing those over the next couple of weeks, just so people can, it'd be fun to do along the way. I didn't want to just like dump all of the videos all at once. So I figured I would do them as kind of a trickle out. It helps to promote the book and all that fun stuff. So I'll be recording these videos in the next few weeks and releasing them, and we'll be using the New York City Pastry Pals podcast as the example of it all. So you'll be able to see them. So fake podcast in a real podcast feed, though. We're real, so don't worry about that. And and we did put disclaimers and everything, so everyone knows this is a fake podcast. So we're not actually trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. All right, Steve. So let's move into our second act here and talk about some of the kind of you characterized it as headwinds, but let's talk a little bit about what are the challenges for businesses and their interest in doing podcasts currently.
I think it's just, I think one of the biggest fears for small businesses is just the numbers. And the numbers, by the numbers, I mean just the sheer number of small businesses and how you're going to stand out within that. There's roughly 36 million small businesses in the country right now. Maybe not in your niche, but overall, there's roughly 4.5 million podcasts. So if you're a small business owner, what do you say to yourself in terms of, how do I break through? How do you break through when there's all those millions of podcasts, all the millions of competition with small businesses? And then you have, what do you do with your budget? What do you do with your time? So I think those are some of the biggest challenges that I think small business owners will face when they think about podcasting. Is it worth their time and money when they're not even sure how many people are going to listen? And then, of course, you have the next step. Well, if they're going to listen, are they going to turn into potential clients? I mean, there's all those kinds of factors that they really have to think about. So that's when I kind of, when we were discussing, like, okay, what are we going to talk about? That was sort of the headwinds. Those were sort of some of the major headwinds for me. What about you? What have you been seeing in this space in terms of what challenges you believe they'll face when it comes more specifically with podcasting?
Yeah, so I think that the general headwinds are usually time management and then, of course, budget. Again, I don't care so much about the naysaying around podcasting as I care about the benefits once people are doing it. And what I find that is that as soon as you get, it's like a flywheel effect. The moment you start doing it, you start to see the benefits of actually doing it. And so, yes, there are going to be all kinds of reasons why you can say there's a lot of competition out there in terms of podcasts. But the reality is that when you localize a podcast, you get your hometown advantage. When you are consistent with your podcast, you are going to beat out the people who pod fade, myself included. You know, I've pod faded a few times. I've stopped a podcast. I've come back on podcasts. I will start another podcast soon. I enjoy that process, and I don't particularly mind that as much. But the goal there is consistency. It's a consistent message, consistent publishing. And as long as you can have staying power, you're going to do well in podcasting. And I see that across the board. Every small business that I know that has a podcast that stays podcasting, they see the benefits. And it's kind of, I've said this on other shows and other podcast interviews, which is that it's a rising tide lifts all ships circumstance. The better and the more you do with podcasting, the better you level up the game across many other areas of your business. You just get better with systems, and businesses are about systems, and that operational efficiency is gained when you start doing well in those categories. And it can start with podcasting, it can start with your bookkeeping, it doesn't really matter. But the goal here is that once you start something and you're consistent with it, you start to see all of the ways in which you can operationalize things better. And when you do that, your business is going to get better. And I find that when you, like, as you know better than I do, Steve, the more you're on the mic, the more and better you get at being able to present yourself well. And I came at it with a speaking background. So I was always in front of audiences. So I was naturally inclined to want to be behind the mic. And honestly, I still like being behind the mic than I do in front of people. But I'm very comfortable in front of an audience. I can only imagine people who are not comfortable in front of an audience. And so the microphone gives them a wonderful crutch to be able to still speak to a crowd of people, right? Every download is another person's set of ears that are listening to you. And doing that in a non confrontational, non judgmental, very relaxed environment.
I want to give a piece of advice that a friend of mine gave me one time, or not necessarily a piece of advice, but in terms of that relationship between the audience and the crowd and talking to folks in person. So, as you can imagine, radio, it, you could literally be talking to millions of people a day, thousands, certainly. I was at a radio network, literally thousands of people were hearing me every day. I was chatting with a friend of mine who had gotten a job at WCBS radio in New York City, all news station, you know, big time, big time. And this was many years ago. The best thing he ever said to me, he said, you know what? It's just another set of call letters. In other words, it doesn't mean how many people you're talking to. You're the best advice is think of, you know, if you're nervous about getting in front of the microphone, and we'll probably talk more about this down the road, think of it as you're having a one-on-one conversation with someone. That takes away a lot of the pressure of thinking, oh my gosh, this podcast could be heard by thousands, millions, whatever it is, if it does really well. No, you're having a conversation with one person. That's what you should be thinking about.
So one thing that I like on the heels of the conversation on the topic earlier of being and having a lot of podcast competition, I want to really um, guard people from the idea that there is and are so many podcasts out there. There really aren't. When we really boil down the numbers to the numbers of podcasters that are out there, the number of podcast shows that are out there that are publishing consistently, there just really aren't that many.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
very different number.
Yes, exactly. And so when it comes to actually competing in this space, you have a very, very wide berth. And so just don't get uh, wrapped up with the fact that there are tons and tons of AI podcasts out there now that are just churning out garbage, and that there are many other big name podcasters who have very large advertising deals and marketing deals and merchandise deals. That's not what we're going for here. We're going for a consistent platform, a consistent marketing channel that you can add into your sales funnel that will create good SEO, will create good trust, reputation, whether that be subject matter expertise or thought leadership, platforming, and it gives you a consistent thing for you to be able to refer clients to when they want to get to know, like, and trust you. And podcasting just does that. It does that on every level of the research that Steve and I did in preparing for this book, but it's also intuitive. If you think about how humans have communicated for eons, we've done that by voice. And as soon as we were able to have that kind of dialogue, we have used voice and verbal communication in myriad ways, not only from arts and culture, but from everyday conversation. And so it's really the way and the mechanism by which we just naturally get to know things. And so it's just a natural extension of why you would want to have people who don't know you, get to know your business and want to buy from you. And I know it sounds very salesy to talk about it in such trite ways, but the reality is that you're doing it in the most natural conversation and consultative, what we call consultative sales, right? You're trying to help people first. And that's what the podcast is really there for, is for you to be able to help people. And it's by you helping them that they get to know, like, and trust you, and therefore want to buy from you. But if you don't do it from that perspective, like if I were just doing this companion podcast because all I wanted to do was sell you books, I don't really care. You know what I mean? Like that's not the reason I'm doing this. And certainly Steve can tell you this is not the reason why I'm doing this book. I'm doing it because I genuinely care about this information. I care about people getting to understand how important and powerful podcasting can be. And I know Steve's there as well. And so we want to be able to get that communication across. And it's no better way to do it than to actually do the podcast here with you all and have that conversation in the most authentic way, right? And so you're going to have a kerfuffle when you start the podcast, and you got to restart the show. You're going to have all these kinds of things that come on and happen, but they're just part of the reality factor of launching and growing a podcast, and certainly sustaining a podcast. And so the goal there is to show people a little bit more authenticity and a little less of that kind of perfect pie in the sky, kind of circumstance.
I
I
want
think
to
it
touch
works. It works.
I want to touch on something that you brought up about that voice connection. And this is a study we did not get in the book, and I actually just found out about this study because I was working with a business book author who has a new book coming out next month called Why We Click, and the author is Kate Murphy, and highly recommend this book, by the way. It's quite fascinating, literally, like why you get along with some people like magnificently, first moment, and you don't get along with people at first moment, but it's talking about that synchrony. So she actually cites some research in her book from Carnegie Mellon, and I'm going to actually look this so make sure I get this correct. Saying that just an audio connection, we are more successful in synchronizing our vocal cues and speaking turns, and we perform better on a collective intelligent task than we would paired on a video conferencing site. So just that audio connection that we have, or just that voice connection that we have via audio as opposed to video.
I
It's
think there
quite
are a lot of
fascinating.
reasons. Yeah, I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think outside of the technological limitations potentially that could be coloring the outcome of that study, there is something that is intuitively just notable about that, which is that when we do take away vision, we have to take into account all of the other subtleties of voice. And so we just spend more focus on the person's timbre, their prosody. All of those things come into play. And so I can see why that would be true. Of course, we'll want to see this, type of research replicated over time. But I can see why it would be true. I could see why it would be really interesting. Let's move on to the next topic, which is audio versus video, because you wanted to raise my blood pressure today.
I did. So we have had many conversations about this, and we want to make clear that our book is an audio first book. And we talk about that a lot in chapter one. So, and this is sort of, I know we're giving some overviews, but in many ways, this is kind of, the genesis for the book, which is the introduction, talking a little bit about chapter one. We've already covered a little bit of what's in the book about that. But more specifically, we do talk about audio versus video. Now, YouTube is the best place for podcast discovery. However, and do you want to go forth and opine about this? And let me just say that we had many discussions about what should we add about video in this book, being that we are an audio first book. I was pushing heavily to Ray that we cannot ignore video because it has become quite large in terms of interest and discovery, and you can't ignore video. But let this, if you can go down a little bit into that audio versus video and the pros and the cons and where you see things.
Sure. Yeah. I think that, it was interesting to hear you talk about video only because, I am someone who consistently pushes back against marketing trends and just helping people understand that like today someone's going to be really excited about TikTok, tomorrow they're going to be excited about TalkTick, right? Like it doesn't really matter what people are excited about today. It's about what has staying power. And so when someone says to me TikTok is really powerful, I say yes. I think it is a remarkably powerful video platform. Lots of people are using it and watching it every day. Is it going to be around in a way that's going to be meaningful in 10 years, 20 years time, which is, sometimes the length of a business's existence. And so I'm very frequently challenged by that, right? I have to forecast for people whether or not they should even invest today for something that they're going to have to put long-term energy into. And YouTube's been around for many, many years. So it's over 20 years now that it's been around. It's going to be around for another 20 years, right? So from my perspective, when YouTube launched YouTube Shorts, it was a very easy thing for me to say, well, yeah, YouTube Shorts is not going to be everything today, but you better believe YouTube Shorts is going to win in the long term. And what did we see happen? TikTok stopped paying as much to their creators, right? Their creator funds started to dry up. And then, of course, they had all of the political machinations. One politician doesn't like TikTok, the other one does. Then they all hated them, and then they outlawed TikTok. And now all of a sudden, TikTok may be back, right? This is the problem with focusing on those issues. When I think about technology and marketing, I think about the underlying technology and whether or not it itself is useful to a business. So nothing about what I'm about to say about is a commentary on video marketing. We can have a conversation that video marketing is an absolute great channel for businesses to utilize. But podcasting for small business happens to be about audio first podcasting. And so I have to fully decouple those. So when you brought that to me, I was like, nope, we're not going to talk about it at all. we're just gonna we're
Oh,
just gonna
we had
set
many discussions.
just going to set that aside. We don't need to have that conversation. And so the book now has what ends up being the kind of the compromise of including some of that conversation that we had about it, because podcasting is an open standard. It is built on a piece of technology that allows people to communicate. And if we believe in a free society, that is the freedoms of society, free speech, those kinds of values, then we have to have a platform that allows us to be able to do that. And we don't have that when it comes to video necessarily. Technically, podcast feeds can do video, but they're incredibly complicated. They're very expensive, and most people are not going to do it. But podcasting allows for a much easier way to access that podcast feed concept and use podcasting to get out to people. There is no gatekeeper, right? No one can stop you from producing a podcast. And so that's one of the number one reasons why I think podcasts are here to stay. Right, it doesn't matter where you are in terms of political, influence or political persuasion. It doesn't matter where you are in terms of any of, trend issues. Podcasting is something that allows everybody to do it in a way, and we're talking about businesses. Every business could start a podcast, and they can do it in such a way that is cost effective and get, if not the same, better results than putting together a video version of the same podcast. And as you can see here, Steve and I are on video. We're doing this kind of
Yes.
video. We're doing this video component of it. But what I really care about are the people who are listening in the podcast feed. Right, I care about the people who are listening in audio much more than I care about the video component of it. And if you're watching live, you can tell that Steve and I are not doing anything all that interesting on screen, right? You're just seeing us, which is nice on some level. But I bet you that if you're listening to the podcast feed, you would actually be getting a little bit more of an interesting experience. One, because you might be doing other things. And so you're kind of doubling your productivity, so to speak. But the other side is that you get a richer sense of our personalities by virtue of hearing our voices. And so I think those are the primary reasons for me why I think I pushed back as much as I did when it came to video. But also, there's, as we talk about in the book, there's just lots of research that shows us that, video is not going to do what audio is going to do.
Do you want to cite one of those that I kind of
Go
forced you
for
to
it.
put in the book?
Go for it.
Or
Yeah.
do you want me to cite it? And there's one study that came after that, as a matter of fact, that we did not get in the book, about audio and video and listenership and consumption. And by the way, looking at us, not very exciting, but if you see in the background over my shoulder, you'll see my cat Deuce. Now he's nice to look at, but um, that's a bad thing to say while I'm on video. And if somebody's listening, they're not going to see his photo. So I broke every single rule that you can possibly break. But no. So do you want to? I want to talk about one study that we did not get in the book, but I do want you to mention the study that I forced you to put in the book. I think you know which one I'm talking about when it comes to this issue. But there was actually a study that came out after we kind of put the book to bed from Cumulus and Signal Hill Insights, and basically saying that audio is still the primary mode of consumption. 92% choose to listen rather than watch a podcast, according to them, but YouTube is still the best place for podcast discovery. So that I thought was kind of an interesting study that bolsters what we're talking about here, and that for small businesses, especially, that audio first makes more sense, and having video components that are marketing, certainly, which we talk about later in the book, and we'll talk about later in this podcast book companion series.
Yeah, we'll get to that in chapter 10. The ultimate goal, of course, is to think about how you're going to get as much of the same results in business without as much hassle, and having to do all of the work of getting video created in the way in which you would need to for it to be a really effective video podcast is just too onerous for 80 to 90%, if not more than that, for all the small businesses that we would be reaching. So it just didn't seem worth it, and it still doesn't seem worth it to me. If I come across a situation where maybe AI or something else really does help with the editing process, I mean, really that ends up being the big crux of the problem. You can record a lot of raw video, but then you have to spend the time editing it. And if you could really get it to a point where it edits it fluidly so well that that video could be done in the same high value that we can do in audio, then maybe I would consider it. But that's a ways off. I mean, it's going to be a ways off into the future, if it ever happens. If it ever happens. So I'm not particularly bullish on video podcasts, and there's just a reason for that. It doesn't make a lot of sense for most businesses to put the energy, time, the money into the equipment just to get a video. Like, if you see what these podcasters, these YouTubers, have in terms of equipment just to produce silly, what I did all day videos, right? They're using really sophisticated, very high end video cameras and recording equipment. You don't need all of that for an audio podcast. You need a good microphone, a decent recording studio environment, and a laptop or some kind of recording device. That's pretty much all you need to be able to do a really, really good job. And, most businesses are just not interested in putting that kind of time and energy into it. And I know that. And I want to make sure that we're doing the right things for the most people.
So I forced you to put this study in. I led you to talk about that study. You did not. So let me just briefly mention that. And the reason why, and after that, I'll mention why I kind of forced us to talk about both. But so there is a recent study by the Podcast Marketing Academy with Lower Street. So they basically talked about, the costs of video. That was part of the study. The costs are substantial. Producing video alongside audio costs 77% more per hour of audience attention than audio alone. Furthermore, for those shows producing both formats, 78% of the total consumption time still came from the audio feeds. So that kind of, again, something that would bolster our case. However, let me also say that the reason I wanted us to not ignore video is the definition of podcasting is blurring. And now people think of podcast as both video and audio. And for the first time, Edison Research, which puts out what they call the Infinite Dial, which studies podcasting each year, this year was the first year that they used podcast consumption rather than, just listening. So the consumption means it can be both consumption of audio and video. So they've, for the first time ever, changed their definition of what it is to, take in. Sorry, I banged my microphone. To take in um, a podcast, an episode.
Right. And again, a podcast feed, the media enclosure technology, the protocol, the specification that is, allows you to have an audio file, a video file, or a PDF. So technically a podcast can be any one of those three. I'm sure that they could add different and other kinds of file types in the future. But the reality is that the vast majority of people know that when they hear podcast, they think audio first, and that part is probably not going to change too much. The number of video podcasts that are an actual podcast, has a podcast feed that's fed out into the world through podcast directories, is infinitesimally small. And so we've already given too much air to video in this episode,
Hey,
in my opinion.
we got to make it clear. Got to make it clear.
No, I think you're right, Steve. But the goal there, of course, the podcast marketing and Lower Street Podcast Marketing Academy and Lower Street study itself does tell us something. Though it tells us that more people are inclined toward convenience when consuming. And watching a video requires an inconvenience in that you have to be at least stationary to be able to watch the video, or you have to be stationary on a moving object like on a bus, a train, or otherwise. You also have to usually have connectivity, meaning that you need to stream that content, not necessarily have downloaded it beforehand. Even though the YouTube app does do smart download, where you can download things ahead of time and then it'll have it available to you, you don't have that on demand aspect of it. And that's really one of the values of podcasting, which is probably why more people consume a podcast, because they've had their podcast app automatically download their very bespoke, curated list of things they want to listen to ahead of time. It downloads, and when they hit play, they're always going to hear something they wanted to hear or see. Versus YouTube or other kinds of platforms, it's a great discovery engine because it's showing you stuff you potentially didn't want to see, and just by happenstance, it's something that you decide that you want to. So it's great for that. And I'm not besmirching YouTube discovery. I think it's really good for podcasting, for people to be introduced to new podcasts. At the same time, YouTube and the other social networks that are out there are designed to distract you from the things you wanted to do and see. So I am much more into engaging all of you in consume over, I'm sorry, create over consume. right? Go create something, don't consume something, right? Or take a 2-to-1 ratio. Create two things for every one thing that you consume. And that's just going to be better for your life. You're just going to feel better in general. So I know this isn't one of my podcasts about living a better life, but you really will have a better life if you take that kind of thought to heart. All right, Steve, let's move our way along into our third act. Let's talk a little bit about uh, why we think people who are watching or listening should start a podcast. What's your argument to folks for why they should start a podcast?
So I think there are four reasons why a small business, a podcast for a small business would make sense. Um, I'll just run them down. And then if you want to talk more in depth about it, and we talk about this in the book, digital SEO, that's one. Branding for your small business, two. We've touched on a little bit of this already, but thought leadership would be number three. Usually I talk in threes, but I'll talk in a fourth today. Engagement. So I think those are very four fundamental reasons why a podcast would make sense for a small business trying to grow their business, reach new audiences, and not only reach new audiences, but again, you've heard me say this before, but reach them in a unique way, in a way that only they can.
Yeah, I don't think I can disagree with any of those four options. You're baiting me to disagree
No,
with you.
no.
But what I would do is this is a call to action. I mean, really the book itself and Steve and I are excited. We hit the Amazon bestseller list today for the Kindle edition, so we're very excited about that. And so thank you to anyone who's purchased the book and watching or listening. We're very excited to be able to get this into the hands of people because we know that the more people who start podcasts, certainly the more business owners who start podcasts, the more those businesses will be able to do better, not just for themselves and their pocketbook, but this really helps their family. This helps their local communities. Small business owners tend to be some of the most generous donors to their local community charities. They're the ones who are and become community hubs during times of crisis. And so we know the power and the importance of small business owners and their ability to not only do better for their local economies in a lot of ways by virtue of their business, but then the business also gives to their local charities and the local communities in other more valuable ways. And so we really want people to be able to do just better in life. That helps everyone have a leg up. And so that's my reason for doing this. And I think it's the reason why almost any small business that picks up this book could and would and should start a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, and it is the business case. I mean, when I ran through those four, it really is kind of the simple business case for why you should start that podcast. And I know you touched on something earlier. We talked about the number of podcasts out there, and in the book we do talk about some of the business landscape in the podcast industry itself. And really, for us, that's all a bunch of white noise. you know you are a small business, you are going to create that little niche for yourself. You don't need a million downloads per episode. You may have 200 downloads per episode or 200 listeners, whatever it is, but that could be a big deal for you, because if you are hitting the right targeted audience, ultimately that's going to be better for your business overall. And one other thing too, I want to when I mentioned thought leadership, um, this for me as a former broadcaster and a news guy and a business broadcaster, um, when as a broadcaster, when I was going out and looking for sources to talk to and interview, if I knew somebody was on a podcast and I heard them and I heard what they were all about, that would be a first choice for me rather than somebody I didn't know about. Because essentially, for that line of work, you want somebody to sound good, not only sound good, but know their stuff. And if you had demonstrated that in a podcast episode, I'd be more likely to say, oh, okay, that's the guy I want to, or that's the woman I want to reach out to first to be, my source for a story that I'm doing, which ultimately then benefits your business by greater reach in a different way than just you doing your podcast.
Yeah, you at least know that they know how to set up a microphone. They know how to speak clearly into a microphone to be able to produce a podcast. And hopefully, they can string a salient thought one after another for radio, which, I mean, it could be nerve wracking, right? Recording in a closed environment for a podcast is not the same of being live on air and or even being interviewed. I've sat for many interviews, and as soon as that recording happens and there's a reporter on the other end, no offense, Steve, but no journalist is your friend. They are all the enemy. So the goal the goal is never to let your guard down when you're speaking to a journalist, right? You start to get comfortable with them and you're going to say things that you don't and shouldn't say. And so the goal there is to never think about a journalist as somehow your friend, and they want you to warm up to them. They want you to give up details that you otherwise wouldn't give up. And so you have to keep that guard up and be as clear eyed about the brand message you are trying to get across when it comes to business, whatever the particular topic is. So if you don't stay central north on that topic, due north on that topic, you'll waver into areas that you haven't practiced, that you're not clear on, and you're going to sound kind of foolish talking about those things, or you're going to say something you really, details you shouldn't be sharing publicly. And that's really, always my concern is don't share things that you shouldn't be sharing publicly with a reporter. And so those things happen versus in a podcast studio you can cut that out later. You can massage the details out of something in post, but you really don't have that chance on radio. And so practice that in your podcasting. So I always podcast as though I'm live, even though we are live right now. I just practice as though I'm in front of an audience live, and that way I don't even have to think about it. Right, whatever I'm saying here is basically going into the the final feed. And if it sounds authentic, that's because it is. It's just me talking, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm happy to talk about it. But I'm not going to massage it in too much of a way that's going to sound forced or stifled, or whatever. Just that's all not necessary. People want to hear real people. They actually, one of the things that I'm curious about your thoughts on this, Steve. One of the things that I've always thought about is that the reason why AI podcasts will never work in the long term for people to like have a real relationship with them is because people listen for the potential gaffe. People love to watch a car accident, and the lack of ability for there to be risk in listening, right? The risk in listening is that we're going to go off the rails, right? That's something that we're going to go off into a tangent that we otherwise wouldn't talk about. That is all those derivations, those kinds of little whatever. They don't happen in a podcast that's designed to just strictly stick to a script or a set of parameters. And so I'm curious if what you think about that.
Well, first, I'm highly offended by being called the enemy. We'll go there first. No, but seriously, we are going to talk a little bit about. We do talk a little bit about, some media training tips if you are going to be a guest on a podcast or elsewhere. So that is in the book. So I won't belabor that point. But regarding, AI, I think there's, aside from going on any tangents, and again, we'll talk about that at a later episode, AI to me just doesn't have the warmth that we do, a human does. There is definitely something missing. And I haven't been able to quite put my finger on it yet, but there's something that's missing that I don't know if it's going to happen in our lifetime that we'll get there, but that's what I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, I listen to YouTube music. I'm one of the 5 people who subscribe to YouTube music, and so most other people are on Spotify. But I really like YouTube music for a number of reasons. And one of the things they've started to do is they have this AI set of co-hosts who have like a little like they're DJing the music as you're listening to it. So you listen to a song and then they'll cut in and they'll then like talk about maybe a little bit of background knowledge about the song, maybe some history or something unique about it, and then they'll play the next song. And it's obviously AI. They label it as AI, and I have to admit, it's actually really interesting, right, on some level, but on another level, I'm just like, "Just play the next song. I didn't actually ask you to talk to me."
And that's
So
that's even becoming that's a whole thing about satellite radio or, you know, Spotify, Pandora, whatever it is that they don't even have, you're not listening to DJs give you that extra stuff.
right.
As a traditional old guy in an old guy in radio, that's what I love, and that's the personality that I love. That's sadly lacking today, especially in, if you're a syndicated radio show or satellite it's just it sounds different than a
Yeah.
local than a local broadcast, whatever that is. And that's again what can be very beneficial for a small business. It's that local feel. You're doing that local business niche targeted podcast.
Yeah, interesting. I only know Delilah, so she's the only one who seems to have staying power in terms of being able to DJ a long running music, segment, of basically time in the evenings. And I don't listen to radio very much nowadays. I'm sorry, Steve.
No, that's
But
okay. No, and I get it. Trust me, I get it.
uh, you know, but there just isn't a lot of human voice left on radio, and for them to be trying to infuse AI voices into music playing platforms, it just is interesting for us to take note of the fact that that probably is going to start happening on podcasts, right? So you're going to see it may be that we start to see in the YouTube podcasts them introduce your show in between other podcast shows. Right, that could be a thing that they do. They're doing that currently with the music. Why couldn't they? They have the transcript of your podcast. They have the transcript of the prior podcast. They can easily synthesize that knowledge and provide kind of a little fake AI to introduce the next podcast for you. And they'll be curious how people prepare themselves for that in the future. But ultimately, again, our thought is be human, use your human voice, use your inside human voice on your podcast, and you'll be fine. Don't worry too much about AI at the present moment in terms of replacing podcasting in any way, shape, or form, any
And
appreciable way.
and I just want to add one thing. We are going to talk about AI and podcasting in chapter 11 of the book. So that'll be coming later in our companion podcasts, a book podcast series.
Yes, we have plenty of things in which we have to talk about over the next 10 episodes left in the series. But we just wanted to get started here with a little bit of an introduction to why we thought people should start a podcast, why we wrote the book, all of that kind of fun, kind of beginning matter. Once we go into the next episode, we'll dig deeper into many of the topics that we discuss throughout the book. And our goal, again, is for you to read the book. So we're not going to really try to, explicate the entire chapter of every book. We really want to talk about the things that we talked about outside of the actual text of the book. So we're hoping that you kind of read along with us, get the book, read along, that kind of thing, and we'll be talking about those issues uh, that stand outside of the book, but I think are important for people to have context for. We think people should have context for as they're making their way through podcasting, including some of the tools and some of the technology and some of the strategies that just didn't make it into the book because there's only so many things you can shove into a book. And so I kept saying to Steve, okay, the book is getting too long. The book is getting too long. And we managed to keep expanding the book over time. So
Essential blueprint. Remember those two words, essential.
yeah, well, we managed to do it. We managed to do it, and I'm sure that it'll probably grow in time. But at the present moment, that's where it stands. All right. So, any final words, Steve, for folks before we close out for today?
Nope. It's all you,
Okay,
Ray.
great. Great. So, thank you everyone for joining us here who joined us live. Those, of course, who are listening in the podcast feed, you can go ahead and subscribe to the podcast if you're not already subscribed in Apple. That's going to be follow, and we will be back next week, same time, same place. And so we will then kind of segue into chapter 2 and discussing some of those pieces. And thank you, Deborah, for the comment there. Thanks. We really appreciate you. And yeah, and so I'm Ray Sidney-Smith with Steve Orr for our Podcasting for Small Business companion podcast. We haven't really come up with a name for it, but that's what we're going to go with for now. And we'll see you next time. Take care.